A little anecdote. My late aunt, about 27 years ago, retired and got a little bungalow down in Worthing. And much to neighbours' amazement, she went and put some solar panels on her roof. They were solar thermal, and about four of them, and she sunk most of her savings into it. But in those days, you used to get a really good feed-in tariff, but it cost a lot of money. But over the years, she's had incredibly low energy bills. Virtually all her hot water was there from the solar thermal panels. And within about 7 or 8 years, they were paid back. And for the rest of the 15 years, we was just sitting there laughing and having a lovely time with the whole thing. So as they say, the best time for everyone to install solar panels is about 25 years ago. The second best time right now. So we have James, who's going to do a presentation. He's the head of engineering at Joju Solar, who are independent experts in solar energy and battery storage and electric charging points. They have designed and installed thousands of systems across the UK, councils, universities, businesses, homeowners. And they're also working with the solar installers, local community energy organisation called SE24 Sustainable Energy. We're hoping to have a presentation from them afterwards, but we're not quite certain whether that will be able to take place. James chaired the first climate change task group for London Borough of Richmond and has written lots of articles for energy in buildings and solar power portals. So, James, over to you. I believe you're speaking in a personal capacity rather than a company. All right, over to you.
Thank you, Charles. I've joined Joju about 13 years ago, just before the feed-in tariff started. So it's a boom time then. And, a solar coaster ride ever since. But Joju actually started a little before that, 2006, and worked in the residential and commercial and head of engineering as well. So, as Charles explained, we do a lot of community work, and just in case Paul doesn't come to his part, just to explain a bit about the community side of solar. I think solar suits community projects very well because you've got a three-way partnership. There's a host building that provides a suitable roof. They may not have the money. Community group will raise the funds to a share off or whatever, and then the installer will do the installation. So it's particularly suited because solar is very much a high upfront cost but low maintenance cost technology compared with most others, nearly all others. We also do, as well as community commercial sized projects, we also do residential houses, of course, and flats. Microgrid is a speciality of mine. It's very difficult to do, but what this is about is if you've got a block of flats, how do you make use of the solar within all the flats? And the answer is you have a meter for the whole building, and then you have private metering for each house. That's one solution. It's difficult to implement, but it can be done. Yeah, before I go any further, I'd be very interested to know something about your. Could you stick up your hand if you already have solar? And if you're interested in a residential type building environment, one commercial kind of building you might know about. Okay. Mainly residential, that's fine. I mainly work on commercial projects. So some of the other community groups we work with currently. Energy for All, you might have heard of, is often an umbrella group for a vast number of community groups across the country. A couple of commercial sized buildings we have worked with. This was a community funded one in South Wales. Community groups Hackney, and the building is Velodrome, like you have down the road. Salisbury Cathedral, which you will have heard of, but probably haven't seen the solar panels because they're nicely hidden. The flat roof, red roof. And that's also South Wales, the Millennium Building in Cardiff. So a flavour of some of our customers. That one I think was, that's not community, that was we paid for that. So now to the boring numbers, which will help you consider your own ideas of solar. you can see from here, the energy varies obviously a lot across Europe, but actually within the UK, it, although the south coast and south east and south west is very good, there's pockets of Scotland even where it's almost as good across the year. So for some. In London though, we're looking at approximately 900 kilowatt hours per kilowatt of panels, solar panels, per year generated. So that's sort of, it obviously depends on the orientation of the panels and the pitch, but that's a ballpark figure for London. And to give you a feel for what 1 kilowatt of solar panels would look like, it's approximately 5 square metres. I mean, a typical solar panel now is about 1.8 metres tall by 1 metre wide, and that would be now 400 watts. When I joined, they were typically 200 watts or even less. They've doubled efficiency. And so on a typical roof, you might have 2 to maybe 4 kilowatts. 4 kilowatts was a big sort of number that people used to talk about because above that, the feed-in tariff rate, the money you got for all your generation dropped a lot, but there's no feed-in tariff now, so you can do what you like in that sense. So typically you might generate 1,800 kilowatts hours per year, which might be half of your electricity use. So looking on financial side a bit more, the feed-in tariff has disappeared. As I said, that went about 2019. Not really needed anymore because the panels have become so cheap over the last 10 years that it's arguably not really necessary to have a funding, except that I would argue that because of the high upfront cost, if you're doing a large system, clearly you might be looking at loans and you're basically paying for something where the revenue is some time in the future. So in that sense, there is an argument for at least low cost loans to be provided, but we don't really have that option at the moment, but that would be nice. So what you get instead, you get savings on your bills, clearly. The rapid increase in electricity prices, that's obvious. It does make, because nobody really knows now what electricity prices are going to be, even less so now than a year ago, it makes the calculations rather difficult, but it's certainly, in most cases, going to be a financially feasible solution. Plus, any energy that you generate and you don't use will be exported to the grid, and it's normally worthwhile now to make sure that you're getting some money for that. In the past, it was rather cumbersome and bureaucratic, and you might have to pay £300 a year, so it only applies to large buildings. But now you can get that export payment quite easily with the Smart Export Guarantee, although it's rather pitifully small compared with the actual price you're paying for electricity, unless you shop around and go for a more general contract, which is possible for larger systems. So typically you might be exporting on a house. I would have estimated 30%. So if you had a battery, you could up that to maybe 70% by storing it when you're not needing the electricity and then using it in the evenings. Again, large buildings like schools, we find typically they'll be exporting maybe 10 to 20%. So again, you still would have to do a battery, but it might not be feasible financially. So just to look at the payback of a residential system, then say we're paying 7,000 for a 4 kilowatt system, then you're saving £360 a year. Your export payments are £100 and pay back in about 15 years. That was assuming, I think, 30 pence a kilowatt hour, but you might be paying more than that soon. So let's look at some of the practical installations and how it all works. You can see on the left, I believe that was St Anne's Church. That was a Power of North London community funded project in Highgate. You can see the rails and the hooks on the slate roof, the hooks which support the rails, and the panels go on the top, clamped on the top. Slates are slightly more difficult, but there's very few roofs that can't be done. This is all traditional tiled roof, and that's what we call on roof, so it's sitting so much above the roof because of the hooks. Those are the white backed panels. Now it's personal preference and also a matter of visibility, but you can also get black panels, which you don't see the individual cells of the solar on the solar module. They're slightly more expensive, the reason being that they're not quite so efficient because you don't have that internal reflection of the light. So to get the same efficiency, you often end up paying more for that, but it's sometimes preferable for a very visible system. The other choice you'll have to make is whether it should be on roof, as I was describing, or in roof. I used to say, well, better to keep it separate, and it's not going to interfere the roof. Why take away a good roof to put solar panels in place of it? But actually, there are good arguments for the in-roof system in certain cases, particularly obviously a new build. You can say you're not going to be taking off any part of the roof. You'll be building around the roof around it. And the other thing is, having thought recently, we've had instances where roofs have needed repair for other reasons. You don't want really to be having to take the panels off just so that people can repair the roof underneath and then put the panels back on again, which is what sometimes happens. So this should reduce that requirement. It does cost a little more, and it also, compared to an on-roof system, but it also is slightly less efficient if you build it into the roof because it gets warmer from underneath. You don't have that airflow underneath. And interesting thing is, in case you weren't aware, is that the solar panels are more efficient in the cold. It's a fascinating program. You can probably hear on BBC So I BBC Sounds. It's on earlier this week about absolute zero and talking about that. It's really interesting. But so whereas your solar hot water systems or solar thermal, which we mentioned earlier, are actually work better in hot. Electricity panels better in cold. So, regards fixing onto flat roofs, two ways this can be done. This is the mechanical fix onto a flat roof, which works fine if it's done with these plates and it can be completely sealed. For a larger roof, you can ballast it, which simply there's no fixing or just weighing it down with paving slabs, but the calculations come out a bit high for most small roofs because of the gustiness of the winds. You need higher weight basically to be safe, and also for a ballasted system with a weight, you'd have to have a structural survey as well, which is okay if it's a larger roof. Not ideal. The orientation, so this will give you a quick idea of the generation. I mean, optimal is 30 degrees at this latitude, but it's okay for a pitched roof. But for a flat roof, it's much more usual to pitch them lower down. It's more practical and you can get more panels on that way. But you don't lose that much. I mean, for a south-facing 10-degree system, it's only about 4% low according to this table. And even east and west, we're still doing pretty well, which is good because that leads you to the idea of an east-west system, which is one of my favourites. And for any flat roof project which I get involved with, I try to look at this, and it nearly always ends up being an east-west system. You can get more panels on because you don't have to leave space between each row. If you imagine you only had south-facing panels, that would be shading the row behind, so you'd have wasted space. But the other point about it is you're going to increase the generation in the evening and the morning slightly, which is actually when you're going to be wanting more electricity most. That's when the prices are going to be high. So I think this is going to be an increasingly important application, solution for flat roofs.
So which direction is east-west there? Is it left and right?
Yes, pretty much. I'm standing south of the rose. That is Greenpeace's.
And is that about 10 degrees?
It's like they used to, this manufacturer of these panels, that's 10 degree, yeah. They also had a 15 degree one, which would be slightly preferable, but I think they're stopping that for some reason. So yes, it's more than 10 degree. This is another way of achieving your high output in the evenings. You simply rotate and tilt the panels to track the sun. We haven't tried any of these yet. I'd very much like to. If anyone's got a lot of land, then let's just experiment with it.
It's all around the chips.
Oh, cool.
Got a park here if you want to use it.
Yeah, so perfect. So, yeah, that's another, I think, increasingly useful solution to not using electricity means.
So what happened? I get the panels, but then how do the panels link with being able to use electric?
Right. You knew what my next slide was, didn't you?
Oh, good.
So yeah, clearly the silicon photovoltaic module generates the DC electricity from the radiation. And only problem brought is some solar cells. So each module consists of maybe 60, 70 or 120 solar cells like this. This one's already full of them, but I'll sit around. They're incredibly, you hold it like that, you're less likely to break it. And they're silicon slices about anything between 0.1 and 0.3 millimeters thick, which then have the metallic contacts on the front and on the back, completely on the back. Some light isn't normally going in there. And then the silicon is a semiconductor, it's just like a diode. It generates 0.7 volts. Then you have 72 of those, say, in series in one module, so you might have 50, 60 volts. There's another more recent innovation which, again, we're thinking about if you've got an application for it, is bifacial modules. So the light could also go in the back. But by doing that, you can increase your output by maybe 15% if you've got light going into the back as well. So that's the, yeah.
Would that be another way of doing an east-west orientation?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, I've thought about I've heard of vertical panels, doing east and west, but then you've got to have a lot of space between them, so it's tricky. People wonder what tier 1 panels is all about. It's basically, it just means that it's trusted by banks for investment. So the thing is, there was, and there are hundreds of manufacturers of solar panels, a lot of them in China and all over the world. So how do you pick the right ones? But you're trusting your installer to use their experience. Banks will normally only rent on ones which are really used in large quantities. So I wouldn't say tier 1 is a guide to the only panels which are any good, because there are some manufacturers which wouldn't be used to pick their volumes in right with a specialist. But that's what tier 1 means. The inverter then converts the DC electricity from the panels to AC. So one of the main functions of the inverter is to extract the maximum energy from the panel, because as the load varies, as the sun varies, sorry, then you've got to vary the load in order to get that maximum output. Otherwise, it will work out very inefficient. And it also has to match the phase and the voltage of the mains. Another important point, some people imagine that if they've got solar panels, they're going to have electricity in a power cut. Well, not normally. It can be done, but it requires extra gubbins and special inverters to do that. And probably a battery as well. So you need isolation switches, generation meter is not technically not must anymore, but it's handy, and an export meter if you want to claim for your export battery. And batteries, of course, which come to in a minute. So some mechanics, how are we going to fit them onto the roof? The hook will simply screw into a rafter if you've got a normal roof like that, and then tile will go back on, completely watertight, aluminium rail bolted onto the hook, and then panels, the modules will be clamped on the top. Slate roof's a bit more expensive to do, a bit more tricky, takes a bit more work, but you can cut the slates or you can use a plastic module which screws over the top and is sealed underneath. You can, by the way, get solar tiles, of course, and solar slates. They're hideously expensive. And the funny thing is, we before I joined, the very first project that Joe did was a solar tile. Haven't done one since. So I don't see them making a big impact, to be honest. Planning permission was mentioned earlier on in the context of heat pumps. For nearly all projects, residential and commercial, it comes under permitted development if you design it right, the distances and so forth. Some of the rules for it are irritating. I'm convinced there were a mistake in the legislation, trying to get that changed, but apart from listed buildings, it should be fine. Even conservation areas, it should be fine as well, although some local authorities, unfortunately, have been, again, interpreting the rules slightly wrongly, in my view, and they know conservation area needs to be well hidden, etc. But I don't think that was the intention. So another design choice is, do you want to maximise your rate of return on investment, or do you want to take a long-term view and do best for your pocket and the environment over the next 20 years? Because that will mean, if you want to do maximise the rate of return, then you're going to be wanting to end up with a slightly smaller system than with the latter design choice. So you're going to be using more of your energy on site if you want faster sort of return, lower export to the grid. Whereas if you're taking a longer term view, you might have a slightly lower rate of return in terms of percentage each year. But the panels are going to be lasting. The panels will be warranted for 25 years. They're talking about 30 or 40 year warranties now. So it's going to be generating for a long time. But you might want a larger system to get that higher impact. What other factors can affect the payback? Talk about the site and complexity and the orientation. The load profile, whether you're going to be out during the day, and that's going to be, if you're not using electricity during the day, then that's going to be reducing the rate of return and of course electricity prices. So if you are out all day, then that's when you might want a battery. Battery's got a number of applications. We're now seeing tariffs where you pay more for your electricity in the evenings. So clearly, if you can store your electricity during the day, use a battery to provide your electricity in the evening, that's going to be one application. You can use it to use the cheap rate electricity, and you won't store for long. You only talk about overnight storage. But whereas, say, 5 or 6 years ago, it didn't really make much financial sense. I think now batteries are coming to their own. And they're proving to be fairly reliable as well. We haven't had many returns. Installed Tesla, that's the battery there. Solon, Germany, and I actually like Give Energy, so the UK company. So these two use lithium iron phosphates chemically in their batteries, which should give a longer life, 20-year design life, so they're particularly attractive. And these ones, the Solon modules of 2 kilowatt hours, you can build up from there. Give Energy, I think smallest at 2.6. Tesla really starts at, I think it's 11, 13, something like that, kilowatt hours, so quite a big beast. Kilograms.
Do you advocate use of lithium iron phosphate batteries? Because they're quite expensive. Because the alternative would be a bigger lead acids where the depth of discharge will be less if you've got space. And that would be cheaper.
Possibly, yeah. You don't hear of much lead acid battery installations nowadays. I think it would take up more space as well. There's various issues with the acid and so forth, the sealed ones, but yeah, it's a possibility. I'm not sure about the price comparison, to be honest.
I mean, what sort of prices do these batteries come in? I've heard some £7,000 for a battery.
Yeah, you're talking for all those, for a similar sort of size, you're talking maybe 6, 7, 8,000. Yeah. The other thing you can look at is, this is where the connection interlink with electric vehicles comes in. You can use, instead of having a separate battery, you can effectively divert your excess solar to charge your car at the right times, or for that matter, to your hot water system, to the immersion, which is easy to do. So exactly is the charger which does that. And clearly it's not always going to be ideal if the car's not sitting there at the time, or charge it off at a different time, but it's certainly a useful feature. And of course, the corollary to that for when you need the energy in the car is V2G, which is vehicle to grid. So then you can take the energy out of the car and start using it, which would be nice. And that's there's experiments going on with that now. We've done some trial installations. Then you don't need the battery separately as well, sitting in your car. So that illustration just illustrates the linkage of the three technologies: the solar panels, the power charging without the grid, and using the battery to change the time of usage. So looking now at the monitoring, I mean, monitoring is critical in my view, because the number of times I've been to some commercial and local authority solar systems have been off for 8 years or something, and nobody's bothered to check them. So we always install, wherever we can, a good remote monitoring system which will alert us to problems. This is the portal for one of them. You can see here what I like on this one. This is a building in East London, Aldgate, Toynbee Hall. And what it shows you is actually the light you can get from clouds effectively. It shows you 2 days. The red is the 29th of December and the blue is the 30th. The red was a really sunny day. Trouble is there's a bit of shading from other buildings at times. Blue is the cloudy day, and which generated more? The cloudy day, by quite some margin. And in fact, the very bright, the very highest peaks of your generation will occur when you've got a break in the clouds. You've got all that lovely light from the clouds plus the sun. So it doesn't have to be non-stop sun. And also this sort of monitoring has let me do some experiments which I love. And I've been comparing different kinds of manufacturers of panels. And what's really interesting here is not necessarily which one comes up best, but how they're so similar, the different yields per kilowatt. It's not the efficiency that's being measured here, because clearly the efficiency of one panel might be quoted as different from another, and that's fair enough, and you're paying for that. But what we're looking at here is whether it's really giving what it says on the data sheet. So on this particular house, we had a mixture of Panasonic and sun power panels, there's 0.1% difference between them. The efficiency is greater, the difference was greater than that, but the yield per kilowatt was virtually identical. And on our office building, which we no longer rent, but we have an office in Camden, and similarly there between two panels, virtually identical. This is another one, school in Lincoln. Almost identical sun power and JA panels, but what you notice here is days of really high sun, which is up this end of the graph, is when one of them, that figure 1 is when they're the same. Whereas the sun power was better at the high sunny days, whereas the other was better low down. And the reason for that is not so much the light difference in light, but the difference in temperature, because panels have different temperature coefficients. Some look better in cold, some look better in less cold. So it's very interesting for comparison purposes. The other thing that really makes one kind of panel stand out from another is how long it's going to last, of course. So we typically quote on our models 0.4% per year degradation. It's very difficult to distinguish the cause of degradation. Is it the panel or is it a bit of dirt? But now we've been going for 10 years or so, we can actually plot the different outputs over 10 years. So you can see if it really does match up to that. And it does, in fact. It's quite remarkable how little the panels do degrade. These figures, by the way, are not the output. This is the output relative to the light for that year. So it's a more accurate representation than just because obviously the climatic variations year to year can be 70%. So that's one pitched roof. That's the primary school, flat roof. Pitched roof. The reason I mention pitched roofs is because they tend to get less dirty than a flat panel system. A low pitched panel is going to get more dirty. You don't really want to be less than about 5 or 10 degrees if possible, because then you'll be cleaning it. On the subject of cleaning, I'm rushing a bit now because I can see I'm running out of time. But I've been doing some experiments to see if it really does need cleaning. The panel normally doesn't. Fine, but so there at that point, we cleaned the panels on our office building. First time it makes no difference, and the difference was very small. You can extract the data by using some clever graphs, and it works out about 1% improvement. Work out whether that's really worth doing or not. But this one's was sitting there for 5 years. You can actually see the dirt on that, and the lichen growing. But there it made a slightly bigger difference. 5 years, 2.5% improvement. But a year later, you lost all that, so you'd have to be going to cleans every year probably to keep that up. Last slide. People do say it's low maintenance, and it is. If it's installed properly, it should give you no problem or very little problem. But it's got the weed going in.
James, that was wonderful to kind of talk to us, run through everything there is to know about solar. Question? Off we go. One at the back, third word.
Thank you. I just want to understand the interplay between how to change one's styles from industrial to something more pleasing to the eye. More pleasing to the eye. The insulation that would come under the new material, and actually taking the opportunity of tile changing to fit a solar panel, maybe in the roof or outside, or on top of the roof. Can you explain how that would work?
So is that changing the insulation in the roof because you're going to replace
Yeah,
the tiles?
because you said why changing a roof if it's a good roof, right? So there is the element of changing an industrial tile roof into something more visually appealing, one, and taking that opportunity to fit the solar panel with the insulation underneath it. That how do the three?
Well, perhaps you misunderstood what I said. Changing it, you wouldn't have to change the roof to fit the solar, but you'd clearly, if you're building the panels into the roof, you'd be taking some of the roof away, so it's a bit of a waste. That's all I meant. So I'm not quite sure where the insulation comes into it. You don't normally if we're just installing panels on a pitched roof, we wouldn't alter the insulation underneath because we don't need to get underneath. Just screw straight into the rafters.
Right. I misunderstood.
Gentleman here had a question.
You've been focusing on electric solar or generating electricity from solar. Given that the other half of the session is on heat pumps, how is it best to integrate solar and heat pumps? Should you use the electricity to drive the heat pump, or is it better actually to have thermal and use that water as an input into the heat pump?
The electric EV works very well with heat pumps. Yes, it's just another source of electricity. So yes, could you use batteries as well in the same? I was funny enough. I was with some friends recently who had in Germany who had getting a heat pump, and they had solar thermal. And they were told by their heat pump installers, and it was correct, but it wouldn't work with their solar thermal system, so they were taken off in the shame.
It does work with a solar thermal system. It's a very good way of doing it if you can. You know, when I spoke about how we have that pipe going around the hot water cylinder that goes from the heat pump, basically you have two sets of them in the same cylinder, one coming from the solar thermal, which is slightly different to solar PV. There's water in them, the water gets heated. So you have two of them, what they're called coils. You have two coils in the same cylinder doing the same job. So the solar gets used as well as the heat pump.
So the thermal warms the tank up a little bit, and then the heat pump does the rest.
Effectively, yeah. Okay. Yeah, because it might not always be achievable for the solar thermal to work. It might not be sunny enough or...
But that means that means a new cylinder.
It would be a new cylinder, but if you was to have a heat pump anyway, the likelihood is you'd need a new cylinder.
We had a question there.
Yeah, it's me.
Oh, sorry, I did one.
So, it's probably a stupid question, but is there some kind of way of working out if your roof isn't east, west, or south, north? You know, your beautiful graph, is there an equivalent for that?
Well,
For a
you
pitch
would look
roof?
at Google Earth is the easiest way to see what the orientation and suitability of the roof is. And you want to avoid roofs which are shaded by trees and other buildings as much as possible.
But yeah, sorry, my question, not clearly stated, was can you put a solar panel on any orientation of pitch roof?
So is it worth doing on northeast, southwest,
exactly.
that kind of thing?
Right,
At what
okay.
point does it become pointless?
Yeah.
You're never
Yeah.
going to get it back. If east-west does work, which are fascinating.
Yes.
So when you start rotating, for
Yeah,
some
yeah.
reason the Victorians didn't build all their houses
Okay.
the right way.
What we would, if you were to come to us or any installer and say, look, give us a quote, then they would look at the orientation of your roofs, and if all you had was a northeast facing roof, they would punch in the numbers and see how it came out, and it would probably may come out with a reasonable answer, but it's unlikely. Nowadays it might, 5 years ago it wouldn't have done, but I mean, I would say anything further north than east and west is going to start to rapidly go downhill.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Right, good question, yeah.
What's your lead time on installation?
For residential, I think it's months. For commercial it might be a little less, which sounds odd, but then commercial there's a lot of lead time anyway because of the other rigmaroles we have to go through.
We had a question at the back. Yeah.
So, years ago, we were told that somehow, that you only can install solar panels on south-facing pitched roofs. Has that changed in the meantime?
Well, it's changed in as much as these prices have gone up and solar panel prices have come down. The economics has changed that. That result. Yeah, so now it's worth doing a lot more situations.
So it would be worth, kind of having an expert come in to assess all the roofs to see which ones are suitable nowadays. Lovely, thank you.
That's good. Right.
Yes, we discovered that if you're east-west, you move about 15% south. If it's just cloudy bright, and you've got shading, have you got to do for that? How much do you lose there?
Well, it depends how much shading, of course. So if it's difficult to say, but if it was like shading 20% of the roof for some of the year, then you might lose 10%. It won't be as bad as you might think, because on a cloudy day, the shading doesn't really make much impact.
That's the big point I was getting at. Okay. And another question, if I may. We've got east-west roof, glassy, it's a waste of sun. I now discover it's not, but it's good news. Thank you very much. But I've also got a flat roof gouge. It's point south. I think if I built a frame over that went up, would that be part of British development, or would I be a special planning?
Garage is a tricky one. For a commercial building, you can go a metre above the roof. For a residence, only I think it's 0.2 something of the roof. So a garage would probably count as the residence. I'm not sure, to be honest. I have to check the legislation on that.
Again, my plan. Thank you very much.
Question down here.
Yeah. So you mentioned about 380 or 400 watt for the panel in residential. How about the commercial ones? They go much bigger in size, or
No,
what was the maximum?
Same panels.
The maximum goes beyond 600 as well, right? Some of the panels go beyond 600 as well, but who's using the same?
Well, we would generally use panels up to about 410 watts at the moment, even on commercial. The bigger ones that you're thinking of are probably 2 meters, 2.1 meters long. I think we have used some 2 meters, but they're a bit cumbersome carrying them. So if you're on a huge solar farm, then you can maybe build that into the management.
I'm just going to put a hold to it for 1 second. We've got Paul here.
I am.
Yeah. We weren't expecting Paul, but he's turned up. Paul is from SE24 Sustainable Energy. Very welcome. Would you like to come and say anything about SE24?
Sure. Yeah.
Come on,
I can take more questions.
Well, we're going to have more afterwards, and there's a whole bit of network.
James not running off anywhere.
No, they can see.
We will be doing more questions, but Paul's come down from SE24, which is Community Energy.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Got any chance, you'd be pleased to. I do have, and in any case, James has covered everything, hasn't he? But I do have some flyers. I'm not sure I've got quite enough, but if anybody wants to come, I'll hang around afterwards. If anybody wants to kind of pop from the formal Q&A, if anybody wants to just come and chat, very happy to do that. Let me introduce myself briefly. So I think you've heard half the story. So Paul Hallis, I'm a volunteer director with a group called SE24, Sustainable Energy 24. We're based right here in Herne Hill, founded about 2015. So we're what's called a community energy organisation, formerly a community benefit society, which means we're kind of not for profit. And what do? We basically develop low carbon projects, mainly kind of above the residential scale, but we develop low carbon projects with local community partners. So I know schools, churches, community halls, hospice, that type of thing. I mean, there's no limit in principle, but it's that kind of thing. So we know James very well. So Joju are somebody company we work with very, very closely. They install for us, but they also do. I think James was talking about the importance of monitoring
you know, after you've installed the solar, and that's, you know, as a householder, you probably notice if it's not working. But, you know, I've come across loads of schools who, after a few years, discover, you know, the solar system's not working. Nobody even noticed it was nobody's job to fix it. So I totally agree with what James was saying. It's not just the installation, it's actually making sure damn thing goes on working smoothly for the next 25 years or whatever. Equally important. So I say we do mainly projects with non-residential partners. So I mean, the last sort of major solar project that we did, people will know, I think, our school in North Dulwich, far away, right? So we put 100 kilowatts or so on the roof of that secondary school, and Joe Ju were the installers on our behalf. I've also got a little solar array at home, which I installed relatively recently. When was that? Middle of last year. I think again the residential arm of Joe Ju were my installers, so this is kind of an advert, I suppose. But they did a pretty professional job, I would say. So far, I'm very pleased. I mean, the only proviso in my case, my array is a little bit too small. I've just got a small flat roof out the back of the house, and if I could have put up more panels, I would have loved to. I would have loved to have done so. So I think my brief this afternoon was talk a little bit about so how people can kind of get involved, and I can see that you're a pretty sort of engaged audience. A lot of people, I know, maybe some of you already got solar. Now, anybody's already got solar installed where they live?
There's a couple of things that are showing off behind.
So a couple already. I'm a small member of that club, and then you know, quite a lot of people obviously thinking about it. I can tell from the level of questions. I was asked to say a little bit this afternoon about how to get involved, not just for people who own their own home, although I think you might be well represented this afternoon, but also for other people in the community, or let's say people who do live in their own home but don't have the whatever it costs, £7,000 or whatever we're talking about to install a solar array. So it's probably most straightforward if you do own your own home, because you know you can either contact an installer directly like Jojo, and there's also, I think, those people have come across these things as a kind of collective scheme, either at the London level or the borough level, of solar together.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of collective, I don't know how well it works in practice because I didn't actually use it, but it's a kind of collective, you know, let's call it a collective buying club, if you like. So the idea is you're part of that, and they buy a load of you know, panels together, and hopefully they get kind of lower procurement and installation costs than you might do if you just did it on your own. On the other hand, obviously, if you do it on your own, you go at your own pace. If you do it through Solar Together, you go at their pace. So you just got to weigh that up. So what happens if you lived in social housing? You know, if you lived in the local authority premises or a housing association place. In one way, that's a bit more sort of complicated because, you know, at the end of the day, it's a decision for the social landlord, isn't it? But I mean, you can get together with fellow tenants association or whatever, and start to kind of raise the issue. I know that some of the community energy groups in the local area. So anybody heard of Repowering Brixton? Yeah, okay, 1 or 2 people. So Repowering Brixton, I think particularly in the early days, they put quite a bit of solar installation on the roofs of local housing estates in Brixton and around that area. Not too sure of the economics now. It might work. Today's high prices, I think most of those early schemes benefited from the subsidies that probably James talks about already. There was a subsidy called the feed-in tariff that was around until a few years ago. That doesn't exist anymore. But I think, yeah, and there is money, there is government money for low carbon projects in social housing. Don't really need to go into the details, but it's come something called now the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, where you know local authorities or housing associations can apply for money to do projects of various kinds. I think the one that's probably most tricky for me is people who live in private rented accommodation, because you know you've got to, first of all, you've got to agree, don't you, amongst the tenants that that's something you would like to do, and then of course you got to get your landlord on board, and you know there's always that sort of tricky thing about what makes financial sense for the tenants might not make financial sense for the landlord. I think there's a way to kind of work through all that, but it is just a little bit more complicated. I would say we take questions if there are any on that afterwards. The other thing I was just say a little bit about was, what happens if you either don't have a suitable roof or you don't have the money, but you actually want to get involved in this stuff one way or another. This is probably a little bit more of an advert for community energy. So, if some community energy groups in London actually have paid employees, we don't, as it happens. Both models exist, but we do have quite a number of volunteers getting involved with what we do. Some of them are directors, some of them have just come on board more recently. So we have been engaging, enthusiastic volunteers in a number of the projects we do, not just solar, but putting LED lighting in local schools, and that was trying to get into energy efficiency retrofits again with aimed at schools, churches, and other sort of community partners. So that if people are keen to get involved in that way, it doesn't have to be SE24, but you can think about contacting your local community energy group, just seeing how you can get involved. One of our volunteers, for example, right at the moment is doing a kind of survey of secondary schools in the borough. I don't want to say the borough of Southwark at the moment, just to see where the opportunities might be for putting solar on secondary school rooms that collectively we might have missed. So. And then the other thing that you can also do if you want to get involved from more of a kind of a money point of view is that there's an opportunity to invest in these type of projects through community energy. So we go out every now and then and raise money for new low carbon projects in the community. I think the last one was about middle of 2021. We raised maybe not quite $250,000, but that's not bad for a small group with a bunch of volunteers. And that is something that is just anybody can invest in that. And it's not a risk-free investment. It's not a very risky investment. It's kind of doing the right thing. It's helping obviously to reduce carbon emissions and net zero. And not just SE24. There are other groups doing similar things all across London. There's probably one in your area, wherever you might be. And that is typically, I would say, subject to a minimum investment of about 250 million. Maybe a bit of room for negotiation there. But I mean, we have now got in SE24 about 100 investors who are also members then of the Community Benefit Society. So the constitutional rules, quite democratic, isn't it? The constitutional rules that we operate under are one member, one vote, not £1, one vote. So anybody who's an investor within a community energy group like ours has got the same say as anybody else. I think I'm going to go into detail. Maybe that's probably time to just kind of stop talking. I think I was told I had 5 minutes, so I'll probably
stop it. You're going to be around afterwards.
I've probably exceeded the 5 minutes already. But if there's quick questions now, do we want to take those? And then
Any questions
I'll hang
for
around
Paul?
afterwards.
I don't know if it's the right. What I'm interested in is the power of community for like solar power in a street, or even in a street, and that's a bit wider than just here now. But for example, a street contacting an energy company and just really looking for what's going to be best deal. So how to get together to have, like, I got my my bill, which is 3 times bigger in terms of electricity and gas this year, and it's like so for me, how to be together to have more more power than alone.
Yeah, well, okay.
So,
There are a couple of ways you can do that. So one is just if you know your neighbours well, to get together in the street. I don't know how James might have a better view about how much economic benefit you would get. But I mean, the other thing which you can do, as I said before, is you could work through something like solar together, which is not a single street, but is a kind of community-based thing where a whole bunch of people who don't necessarily live next door to one another get involved to try and get a better deal. So I'm not sure that it makes a lot of difference. I'm not sure that working with the 10 people in my street would be much different than working the 10 people like scattered across the borough, except that obviously the street-based thing is more of a community feel to it, isn't it? Working with your neighbours if you can. I know 1 or 2 community energy groups have actually got they've got funding to do like specific projects with a street. Well, I think not just solar, but probably a range of low carbon stuff but it is kind of I think some of this is at the kind of pilot scheme basis. So I know the people down in Brighton have been doing this. They've got a street where they're doing a whole bunch of low carbon projects in one street. And I think our friends in South East London Community Energy based in Greenwich, I think they're starting to do something similar. So it does exist. And you can, I say you can either go through Solar Together or you could try and go through a community energy group and do that. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, look at London Community Solar, which is part of Repowering.
Yeah.
They're really active and they're looking for people to get involved.
Yeah, same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, it's not. I mean, there's nothing unique about SE24. So depends where you live. If you're in Brixton area, then Repowering or as you call it, Community Energy. That's the local group there. We're based in Herd Hills. That SE24, as the name suggests, the clues in the name. And we're kind of on the boundaries between Lambeth and Southwark. As it happens, I think we've done most of our projects today in Southwark, and then there's other groups. I talked about South East London Community Energy based in Greenwich. They also cover projects in Lewisham, and there are other groups in South West London as well. So it just depends. I don't know where everybody lives. I suspect most people are fairly local, but there are a number of community energy groups over London, and we work together quite closely